He took a deep breath. She started leaving notes in my locker, poems, then longer letters, declaring her love for me, saying we were destined to be together. She thought we had a special, unspoken connection. She started following me home. She confronted Isabel in a car park. It got to the point where we had to involve the hospital administration, the police. There was a restraining order. It was a nightmare. Isabel was terrified. It's a trauma she's never fully gotten over. The world dissolved around me. Every memory of the last 10 years began to rapidly, sickeningly reconfigure itself. Every lingering look, every soft-spoken word, every moment of special connection. It wasn't attraction. It was fear. It wasn't a budding romance. It was hypervigilance. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing the ghost of another obsessed nurse. His kindness, his gentleness, his careful distance, it was all a strategy. A strategy to manage me, to keep me calm, to prevent me from becoming another Sarah. When he saw my feelings for him growing, he didn't see a potential affair. He saw a potential stalker. When you started at St. Jude's, he continued, his voice heavy with regret, I saw the same look in your eyes, the same intensity, the same devotion. It terrified me. I told myself it was different, that you were professional, stable, but I was always watching, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's why I never encouraged anything. That's why I kept my distance. The day I lost the patient, I said, my voice numb, when you touched my arm. He nodded slowly. I saw how much you were hurting for me. For a moment, I forgot to be cautious. I just saw a kind colleague, and then I saw the look on your face when I touched you, and I panicked. I knew I had let it go too far. I can't afford to lose you. He didn't mean he needed me. He meant he couldn't afford to have another unstable nurse on his hands. He couldn't afford another scandal. When I burst into tears on my last day, he hadn't seen heartbreak. He had seen hysteria. He had seen obsession. He had seen a problem escalating. His request for me to stay wasn't a plea. It was a desperate attempt to keep the situation under his control, where he could monitor it. The entire 10-year epic love story I had written in my head was a complete and utter fiction. I wasn't the tragic heroine. I was a supporting character in his long-running horror film. The humiliation was a physical force, so powerful it buckled my knees. I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. The pain of unrequited love was one thing. This was something else entirely. This was the pain of abject foolishness. My grand passion was his private burden. I am so sorry, Elara, he said, his voice thick with genuine remorse. I should have handled it differently. I should have spoken to HR, had you transferred. But you were so damn good at your job, the best I've ever worked with. And I told myself I was imagining it. I hoped I was. I never, ever wanted to hurt you. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the filter of my fantasy. I saw a tired, stressed man who had been walking on eggshells around me for a decade. A man who was not my soulmate, but a victim of my unintentional emotional siege. I started to laugh. It was a hollow, broken sound that echoed in the quiet alcove. Oh God, I gasped. Tears of shame, not sorrow, now streaming down my face. You must think I'm insane. No, he said softly. I think you're a person who feels things very deeply. And I think I was a coward. I'm sorry. There was nothing left to say. The ghost that had haunted me for a decade had been revealed. And it wasn't the ghost of a great love. It was the ghost of my own delusion. I walked away from him, out of the hospital, and back into the rain. I drove home in a daze. The pain was still there, but it had changed its chemical composition. It was no longer the noble, tragic ache of a great romance, but the sharp, acrid sting of embarrassment. It was a pain I could heal from, a wound that could be cleaned. I walked into my house. Liam was home, asleep on the sofa, a book open on his chest. The television was on, muted. He'd waited up for me. I looked at his peaceful face, at the gentle rise and fall of his chest. This was real. His love for me wasn't a projection or a misunderstanding. It was solid. It was true. I went upstairs and looked in on Chloe. She was sleeping soundly, her face angelic in the soft glow of her nightlight. I had almost been willing to let the foundation of her world crumble for the sake of a man who was afraid of me. The thought didn't fill me with guilt anymore. It filled me with a quiet, steely resolve. I went back downstairs and gently woke Liam. He blinked up at me, groggy. "Hey, is your friend okay?" "She will be," I said, my voice clear for the first time in years. I sat down on the floor in front of him and took his hand. "Liam, there's something I need to tell you. The coming months will be hard. I have a marriage to rebuild, not from infidelity, but from a decade of emotional absence. I have to find a new career. I have to learn how to live inside my own life, not as a visitor, but as a resident. But as I sit here, holding my husband's hand, ready to confess everything, I know one thing for certain. The haunting is over. The ghost of St. Jude's has finally been laid to rest. I am no longer in love with Dr. Julian Croft. I was never in love with him. I was in love with a story I told myself, and the story is over. And for the first time in 10 years, I am free." The first 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. A silent, suburban hell. The frantic, life-or-death rhythm of the hospital was replaced by the gentle hum of the dishwasher and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Time, which had once been measured in surgical hours and drug rounds, now stretched before me, empty and vast. I tried to fill it. I deep-cleaned the house, organized closets, cooked elaborate meals. I went to Chloe's school, play, and sat in the front row, smiling until my face ached. Liam was tender and patient. He thought I was grieving a career, a part of my identity. "It's a big change, Elle," he'd say, wrapping his strong arms around me. "Give yourself time." He had no idea he was comforting a widow, mourning a man who was still alive. Every night, I would lie beside him in the dark, my body rigid with the effort of not crying, the space between us feeling like a continent. I was a ghost in my own life. The ghost of St. Jude's, however, was not so easily exorcised. I'd see a man with dark hair on the street, and my heart would seize. I'd hear a hospital siren in the distance, and be instantly transported back to the OR. Julian was everywhere and nowhere. The severance I had hoped for hadn't brought peace, only a more acute form of pain. The ache was no longer a fire. It was a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month after I had quit. It was raining, a miserable, persistent London drizzle that matched my mood. I was staring out the kitchen window, watching the water drip from the bare branches of the oak tree in our garden, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. "Hello, Elara. It's Maria. Maria Jenkins, from C-Pod." Maria. A younger nurse from my old unit. A notorious gossip, but a good heart. "Maria, hi. Is everything all right?" "Oh God, Elara, it's awful." Her voice was tight with panic. "There's been an accident. A car crash. It's Isabel Croft." The stone in my stomach dropped. "What is she?" "She's alive. They brought her into A&E an hour ago. Multiple fractures. A possible head injury. They're taking her up to theater now. Julian, Elara, he's a wreck. He's not allowed to operate on her, of course. Mr. Davies is taking the case. But he's just lost. He keeps asking for people, for updates. He asked for you." My blood ran cold. "He asked for me." "Yes," he said. "Is Elara here?" "I need Elara. He looks like he's seen a ghost. I know you don't work here anymore, but I thought you should know." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, the world tilting on its axis. He asked for me. Not Nurse Vance, the competent professional. Elara, In his moment of absolute crisis, my name was on his lips. The dormant, dying embers of my hope roared back to life, a blinding, terrible fire. My therapy, my resolve, the agonizing decision to quit all of it, incinerated in an instant. I didn't think, I acted. I grabbed my coat and car keys, scribbled a hasty note for Liam, friend from work in an accident, gone to the hospital, and ran out into the rain. St. Jude's was exactly as I had left it, yet entirely different. I was no longer an insider. I was a visitor, an outsider. The familiar smells and sounds now felt alienating. I found my way to the surgical waiting area, a sterile room with uncomfortable chairs and old magazines. And there he was. He was sitting in the corner, head in his hands, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. He looked smaller, stripped of his usual aura of command. He looked like a man, terrified and broken. My heart ached for him, a pure, uncomplicated ache that superseded everything else. I walked over to him slowly. Julian, he looked up. His gray-blue eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red. When he saw me, a look of profound relief washed over his face. He stood up, and for a wild second, I thought he was going to embrace me. Instead, he just stood there, swaying slightly. Elara, you came. His voice was a raw whisper. They won't tell me anything. I'm her husband, but in here, I'm just a liability. I can't think straight. Mr. Davies is the best, I said, my old professional calm kicking in. It was a relief to have a role to play. She's in the best possible hands. I know that in my head, he said, gesturing to his temple. But my heart. He trailed off, his gaze unfocused. I keep seeing the car, the twisted metal. For the next 4 hours, I sat with him. I made him drink coffee. I spoke to the liaison nurse, getting updates in the clipped, professional shorthand we both understood, and translated them for him into a language of reassurance. I became his anchor. I was no longer the lovesick nurse. I was his colleague, his equal, the one person in the world who could navigate both the medical and emotional labyrinth he was trapped in. It felt right. It felt like this was where I was, always meant to be, by his side. Finally, Mr. Davies appeared, his green scrubs dotted with sweat. She's stable, Julian. The surgery went well. She has a broken femur, 2 fractured ribs, and a moderate concussion. She's lucky. She's going to be fine. Julian sagged against the wall, tears of relief finally tracing paths through the exhaustion on his face. I felt a tear slip down my own cheek. He looked at me, his expression raw and grateful. Thank you, Elara. I don't know what I would have done. You don't have to thank me, I said softly. He insisted I come with him to see her in the recovery room. She was lying in the bed, looking small and fragile amidst the tangle of wires and tubes. Her beautiful face was pale and bruised. Julian went to her side, took her hand, and whispered her name. His devotion was palpable, a quiet, powerful thing that pierced my heart with a pain sharper than any jealousy. This was real. This was the love he went home to every night. What I felt was a shadow. I started to back out of the room, to give them privacy. Don't go, Julian said, not looking at me. Please. So I stayed, standing in the corner, like a sentinel. Isabel stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Her gaze was hazy, unfocused. It drifted past Julian and landed on me. A flicker of recognition, a small, confused frown. You, she murmured, her voice raspy. You're the one. From the letters. I froze. The letters. What letters? I looked at Julian, completely bewildered. His face had gone pale, a mask of sheer panic. He shot me a look of such desperate warning that it stopped the breath in my lungs. My love, he said to Isabel, stroking her hair. You're confused. It's the medication. Just rest. She closed her eyes again, slipping back into a drugged sleep. The silence in the room was deafening. The beep of the heart monitor sounded like a ticking bomb. I should go, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Julian followed me out into the corridor, closing the door gently behind him. He looked cornered, his composure utterly gone. What did she mean? I asked, my heart pounding. What letters? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, running a hand over his face. Elara, it's complicated. It's not what you think. What do I think, Julian? My voice was sharper now, fueled by a sudden, cold dread. I've never written you a letter in my life. Who does she think I am? He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a pity so profound it made me feel sick. It wasn't you. It was before you. He guided me to a deserted alcove, away from the traffic of the corridor. About 12 years ago, right before I started at St. Jude's, I was at King's College Hospital. There was a nurse there. Her name was Sarah. She was very dedicated, very intense. At first, I thought it was just professional admiration, but it escalated. That night, I went home to Liam. He was in the kitchen making pasta, Chloe chattering about her day at school. He smiled as I came in, kissed my cheek, and asked how my day was. I looked at this good, kind man who had given me a life of stability and love, and I felt like the most despicable traitor on earth. The phantom sensation of Julian's hand on my arm was more real to me than my husband's kiss. That was when I knew I had to leave. Not just the job, but the fantasy. I had to perform the surgery on myself. My husband deserved a wife who was fully present. Julian's wife, Isabel, whom I'd only seen at hospital functions, a beautiful, serene woman who deserved better than a nurse obsessing over her husband deserved to have her marriage untroubled by my shadow. I had to get away, to have any chance of saving myself, and so today, my last day, arrived. The hours crawled by in a blur of forced smiles and hollow goodbyes. My unit threw me a small party in the break room. Cake, a card signed by everyone, cheap sparkling wine and paper cups. Other surgeons I'd worked with for years stopped by. Mr. Davies, the avuncular head of orthopedics, gave me a hug and told me I was irreplaceable. Dr. Chen from anesthetics praised my calm under pressure. Their words were kind, but they were just noise. The only voice I was listening for was silent. He didn't come to the party. I knew he wouldn't. It wasn't his style. My last official act was to sign out my locker key at the nursing station. As I turned to leave, my box of personal effects in my arms, he was there, leaning against the corridor wall, as if he'd been waiting. He wasn't in his scrubs, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that made him look even more impossibly handsome. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. Leaving without saying goodbye. Elara, he asked, his voice low. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, clutching the box like a shield. He pushed off the wall and took a step closer. The familiar, subtle scent of his cologne sandalwood and something clean, like rain, filled the air. It was the scent I sometimes imagined on my own pillows. I heard about the party, he said. I'm not one for crowds. He gestured vaguely down the hall. This is a mistake. I have to go, I whispered, my voice thick. Why? He pressed, his gaze intense, searching my face. Is it the money? The hours? Whatever it is, we can fix it. St. Jude's can't afford to lose you. I can't afford to lose you. Those words, I can't afford to lose you. The professional meaning was clear. I was a valuable member of his surgical team, but the way he said it, the raw edge in his voice, the desperate look in his eyes, it detonated everything I had tried to suppress. The hope I had so brutally tried to kill rose like a phoenix, and I broke. A sob tore from my throat, a ragged, ugly sound. The tears I'd been holding back all day burst forth, hot and uncontrollable. I saw his face shift from concern to shock, to something unreadable, pity, alarm. I couldn't bear it. I felt like a fool, a hysterical, lovesick teenager. I'm sorry, I choked out, turning away from him. I fled. I didn't just walk away. I ran down the corridor, my sensible nursing shoes slapping against the polished linoleum. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I half stumbled into the stairwell, the heavy fire door slamming shut behind me, sealing me in with the echoing sound of my own weeping. I collapsed onto the cold concrete steps, my body shaking with the force of my grief. My soul didn't just ache. It felt like it was being physically ripped from my body. I cried until I was empty. Cried for the 10 years I had wasted in a dream. Cried for the life I couldn't have. Cried for the man I was leaving and the man I was going home to. Driving home through the congested London traffic. The city lights blurred into streaks of color through my tear-filled eyes. Each red light felt like a personal judgment. Stop. Stop this madness. I got home and walked into the quiet, warm house. Liam was out at a late site meeting. Chloe was at a sleepover. The silence was absolute. I stood in the hallway of the life. I had built a life that should have been enough, and felt nothing but a vast, cavernous emptiness. The box in my arms contained a few medical textbooks, a framed photo of Liam and Chloe, and a coffee mug. Nothing of value. Everything that had mattered, I had left behind at St. Jude's. I walked into my study and sat at my desk, the pain in my chest so intense it was hard to breathe. I am a nurse. I am trained to assess, to diagnose, to treat. And the thought that entered my mind then was a clinical assessment of my own pain. It was a pain so profound, so total, that for the first time in my life, the idea of simply making it stop permanently didn't seem insane. It presented itself as a logical, viable option. An end to the haunting. The thought terrified me more than the pain itself. The cold, rational way it appeared in my mind. I won't do it. I have a daughter who needs her mother. I have a husband who loves me. But the fact that the thought was there, a dark door I had never before noticed, shook me to my core. I am trying to do the right thing. For my husband, for his wife, for my own sanity. But as I sit here in the dark, the ghost of Julian Croft standing in the corner of my eye, I have to be honest. This is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I don't know how I'm going to survive it. The smell of sterility is a smell I once associated with purpose. Antiseptic, laundered scrubs, the clean metallic temps of surgical instruments. For 10 years, it was the air I breathed, the scent of my life. Now, it just smells like loss. It smells like him. My name is Elara Vance. For a decade, I was a senior theater nurse at St. Jude's, one of the best. For that same decade, I have been in love with a man who is not my husband, Dr. Julian Croft. A name that has echoed in the chambers of my heart so relentlessly, it has become its own kind of pulse. Today was my last day. The decision to quit was not a single, clean incision, but a ragged amputation, performed on myself without anesthesia, over the course of 2 agonizing years. I am a woman in my late 30s. I have a beautiful, clever daughter, Chloe, and a husband, Liam, whose goodness is so profound, it feels like a constant, gentle rebuke to the secret I've carried. I am, by all accounts, an attractive woman. I've never lacked for male attention, but it's always been like noise from a distant radio, ignorable, irrelevant. Until Julian. The first time I saw him, he was scrubbing in for a complicated aortic valve replacement. I was a relatively new nurse then, eager and sharp. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing, his focus so absolute the rest of the world seemed to fall away. When he looked up, his eyes a startling gray-blue, the color of a winter seemed mine over his mask. It wasn't a glance, it was a recognition. In that fraction of a second, a hook was set deep in my soul, and for 10 years, I have done nothing but pull against it, embedding it deeper. The guilt has been a physical entity. It has sat on my chest, stolen my breath, soured food on my tongue. I've confessed it all to the silent, upholstered walls of a therapist's office on Harley Street. For years, I spoke of Julian. Dr. Evans, my therapist, a woman with kind eyes and infinite patience, finally told me 6 months ago, Elara, we've dissected this from every angle. At some point, you must either accept the feeling and let it be, or change the circumstances. I tried to accept it. Limerence, obsession, Levive called it everything. I've read every book on the subject. It's a chemical reaction. It's a projection of unmet needs. It's a fantasy. But knowing the name of the disease doesn't cure it. Thinking of him multiple times a day, every single day, without fail, for 3,650 days, is not a crush. It's a haunting. I hated my job. The long hours, the stress, the hospital politics. But I stayed. I stayed because the thought of not seeing him, of not standing across from him in the operating theater where our wordless communication was a symphony of shared competence, was unbearable. In the theater, we were a unit. He'd ask for a DeBakey forceps without looking up, and my hand would already be there. He'd murmur, pressure's dropping, and I'd already be checking the lines. In those moments, under the fierce white lights, with a human life in our hands, nothing else existed. My marriage, his marriage, the suffocating guilt, it all vanished. There was only the procedure, and there was only us. It was an unspoken intimacy, more profound than any physical touch could ever be. We never crossed a line. We never had coffee alone. We never exchanged a single text message that wasn't strictly professional. But the attraction was there, a high-voltage current in the air between us. I would see it in the way his gaze would linger a second too long when I passed him in the corridor. The way his voice would soften when he spoke my name. Elara could. You check on the post-op in, I see you. A simple request, but in my starved heart, it sounded like a love song. I'm sure he sensed my feelings. A man that perceptive couldn't miss it. But I believe for him, it was a flattering, harmless admiration. He has no idea of the sheer, terrifying magnitude of it. He doesn't know that his offhand compliment about my efficiency 3 years ago sustained me for 6 months. He doesn't know that I remember the exact pattern of the silk tie he wore to the hospital's charity gala in 2018. If he knew the truth, the obsessive, pathological depth of my feelings, he wouldn't be flattered. He would be horrified. The breaking point came 3 months ago. It was a Tuesday. A patient, a young man of only 19, died on the table. A congenital heart defect, impossibly complex. We worked on him for 9 hours. Julian was a titan, fighting death with every fiber of his being. But we lost him. After we called the time of death, the theater emptied out, leaving just the two of us. He stood motionless, his back to me, his gloved hands resting on the stainless steel table. I saw his shoulders slump in a way I had never seen before. There was nothing more we could have done, Julian, I said softly, using his first name for perhaps the 5th time in a decade. He turned around, his mask hanging from his neck. His face was a canvas of exhaustion and grief. His mother is in the waiting room, Ella. She gave me a photo of him this morning. He was going to university to study engineering. He ran a hand through his dark silver-streaked hair. Sometimes, I hate this job. And then he did something that shattered my carefully constructed defenses. He stepped forward and placed his hand on my arm. Just his hand, on my scrub-clad forearm. A simple, comforting gesture. But for me, it was a brand. I could feel the heat of his palm through the fabric, a jolt of electricity that shot straight to my core. My breath hitched. I looked from his hand to his face. His eyes were filled with sorrow, but they were fixed on me, and in them, I saw a flicker of something else, a shared despair. A connection that felt dangerously personal. He held it there for a long moment. The world shrank to that single point of contact. My husband's face, my daughter's laughter, his wife's elegant smile, all of it faded to gray. All that was real was his touch. Then, as if realizing what he was doing, he snatched his hand back. A shadow passed over his face. "I'm sorry," he murmured. his voice suddenly formal again. "I'm tired. Thank you for your work today, Nurse Vance." He turned and left the theater, leaving me trembling in the silence, the ghost of his touch burning on my skin.